At my daughter's graduation party, she announced, "My stepdad bought me a car. My real dad never did anything." I smiled and left. The next morning, her college fund was empty and the gift car got repossessed. My ex-wife has been calling nonstop. I, 42M, stood in the corner of the backyard, watching 18 years of my life get reduced to nothing with a single sentence from my daughter's mouth. The graduation party was in full swing, relatives mingling around the pool, congratulating her on finishing high school with honors. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The moment came when everyone gathered around as she stood on the patio steps, radiant in her cap and gown. Someone asked about her plans for college, and that's when she dropped the bomb. She talked about how grateful she was to her stepdad for buying her the shiny red Honda Civic parked in the driveway, then added the words that would change everything between us forever. She told everyone how her stepdad had always been there for her, always supported her dreams, while her real dad, me, had never done anything meaningful for her. The crowd went quiet for a moment, then quickly moved on to other conversations, but I felt every pair of eyes that had glanced my way. My ex-wife stood beside her new husband, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. He just smiled that smug smile I'd grown to hate over the past 3 years since they'd married. I walked over to my daughter, gave her a hug, and told her I was proud of her graduation. She hugged me back, but it felt hollow, perfunctory. I told her I loved her and that I hoped she'd have a wonderful time at college in the fall. Then I said goodbye to a few relatives, nodded to my ex-wife, and walked out the front door. The drive home was a blur of anger, hurt, and something else, a cold calculation that surprised me. For 18 years, I'd been the reliable parent, the one who never missed a child support payment, even when I had to choose between groceries and gas money. The one who saved and scraped to build a college fund that now held $47,000. The one who attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game, even when my ex made it clear I wasn't welcome. When I got home to my small apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a beer and really thought about what my daughter had said. Not just the words, but the casual cruelty of them. The way she dismissed 18 years of sacrifice without a second thought. The way she'd let her stepdad take credit for buying her a car when I'd been funding her entire future education. I spent that night going through old bank statements and receipts. Every birthday party I'd paid half of. Every school trip I'd funded. Every medical bill I'd covered. Every Christmas present I'd carefully chosen and wrapped. The dance lessons, the sports equipment, the tutoring when she struggled with math. Thousands upon thousands of dollars and countless hours of my life, reduced to never did anything. By morning, I made my decision. I drove to the bank as soon as it opened. The college fund was in my name. I'd set it up when she was born, adding to it religiously every month for 18 years. The bank teller was helpful and efficient. Within an hour, the account was closed and the money was transferred to a new savings account accessible only by me. Then I made a few phone calls. I'd been suspicious about that Honda Civic from the moment it appeared. My ex-wife's new husband worked in sales, but I'd heard through mutual friends that his company had been struggling. A little investigation revealed what I'd suspected. The car was financed, not purchased outright, and they were already behind on payments. One call to the finance company, providing them with updated income information I'd recently learned about, and they agreed to reassess the loan. Funny how quickly things can change when people realize the borrower doesn't actually make enough money to afford the payments. My phone started ringing around noon. First my ex-wife, then her husband, then my daughter. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started polite, asking me to call back, then grew increasingly frantic. The first voicemail from my ex-wife was calm. She said she needed to discuss something important about our daughter's college plans and asked me to call her back when I got the message. The second message came 2 hours later, less composed. She'd clearly been to the bank or tried to access the college fund online. She wanted to know what was going on and demanded I call her immediately. By the third message, she was barely controlling her anger. She accused me of being petty and vindictive, said I was punishing our daughter for something that wasn't her fault. She reminded me that I had a responsibility as a father and threatened legal action. The messages from her husband were more direct. He called me pathetic and accused me of manipulating the situation to hurt their family. He said real men don't take out their anger on children and that he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. But it was my daughter's messages that were the hardest to listen to. The first one was confused and hurt. She said she didn't understand why the college fund was gone and asked if there had been some kind of mistake with the bank. She wanted to know if I was okay and if something had happened. The second message was angry. She said her stepdad's car had been repossessed and that she had no way to get to her summer job now. She accused me of ruining her graduation celebration and demanded an explanation. The third message broke my heart. She was crying, asking what she'd done wrong, pleading with me to call her back so we could fix whatever had gone wrong between us. I almost called her back then. Almost. But then I remembered standing in that backyard, listening to her dismiss 18 years of my love and sacrifice in front of everyone who mattered to both of us. I remembered the smug look on her stepfather's face as he accepted praise for my generosity. Instead, I poured myself another beer and waited. Update 1. It's been 3 days since the graduation party, and my phone hasn't stopped ringing. I've received 47 calls and 32 text messages. I haven't answered or responded to any of them. Yesterday, my ex-wife showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as she knocked and called my name, but I didn't open the door. She stood there for almost 20 minutes, alternating between pleading and threatening. She said our daughter was devastated and that I was destroying her future out of spite. She promised we could work things out if I would just be reasonable. When I still didn't answer, she started talking through the door about lawyers and court orders. She said she'd researched the legalities of the college fund and that she was prepared to fight for our daughter's money. She reminded me that I'd always promised to pay for college and that taking the money back was a betrayal of every agreement we'd ever made. After she left, I finally listened to the voicemails I'd been ignoring. My daughter had called 6 more times. In the most recent message, she sounded exhausted and defeated. She said she knew I was angry about something she'd said at the party, and she was sorry if she'd hurt my feelings. She begged me to please not punish her for something she didn't understand. That message almost broke me. For a moment, I considered calling her back, transferring the money back to her account, and pretending none of this had ever happened. But then I realized she still didn't get it. She was sorry for hurting my feelings, not for what she'd actually done. She was treating this like I was having some kind of emotional overreaction rather than recognizing the fundamental disrespect she'd shown. I've been thinking a lot about respect these past few days, about how it's earned and how it can be lost, about the difference between being a father who's taken for granted and being a father who's valued. For 18 years, I chose to be the reliable one, the steady presence, the one who never made waves or demanded recognition. I thought that was what good fathers did. But somewhere along the way, my consistency became invisible. My sacrifices became expected. My love became assumed rather than appreciated. And when given the choice between acknowledging my contributions or elevating someone else at my expense, my daughter chose to throw me under the bus without a second thought. The irony wasn't lost on me that her stepfather's grand gesture, a car he couldn't afford, financed with money he didn't have, was being praised while my quiet, steady support was dismissed as doing nothing. It was a perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. The flashy, surface-level stuff got the credit while the real foundation went unnoticed. This morning, I made a decision. I drafted a letter to my daughter explaining everything, not out of anger anymore, but from a place of sadness and clarity. I wanted her to understand what these past 18 years had looked like from my perspective. I wanted her to see the spreadsheets I'd kept, tracking every expense related to her well-being. I wanted her to understand that the college fund hadn't just appeared magically. It represented thousands of small sacrifices, dozens of vacations I didn't take, 100 dinners out I'd skipped, and countless other expenses I'd avoided so I could save for her future. But then I realized that if she couldn't see it already, no letter was going to open her eyes. The numbers and receipts wouldn't matter if she'd fundamentally decided that my contributions weren't valuable. I deleted the draft and started over with something much simpler. Update 2. A week has passed, and things have escalated in ways I didn't expect. Yesterday morning, I found my tires slashed and my apartment mailbox broken open. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. My ex-wife's husband has apparently decided that intimidation is his next strategy. I called the police and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was professional but seemed skeptical about the whole situation. He asked about any recent conflicts I'd had, and when I explained about the college fund and the graduation party, his expression changed. He told me that family financial disputes rarely qualified for serious police intervention, but vandalism was still vandalism. The incident made me realize this situation was spiraling beyond what I'd intended. I wanted to make a point about respect and consequences, not start a war. But it also confirmed something I'd suspected. This was never really about the money for them. It was about control and appearances. My ex-wife had built a narrative where she'd moved on to a better life with a better man, and my daughter's college fund was part of that story. The money I'd saved was supposed to seamlessly transition to being part of their family's success, with me fading into the background as the divorced dad who'd played his part and stepped aside. The car repossession had embarrassed them publicly. Friends and family who'd attended the graduation party now knew that the grand gesture hadn't been so grand after all. My ex-wife's husband's reputation as the generous stepfather had crumbled, and people were asking questions about their finances. But what bothered me most was that through all of this, my daughter still hadn't reached out to me directly. Her messages had stopped after that last tearful voicemail. According to mutual friends, she was telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown and stolen her college money out of jealousy. That narrative stung because it was so far from the truth. I hadn't acted out of jealousy. I'd acted out of self-respect. There's a difference between wanting recognition and refusing to be disrespected, and I was disappointed that my daughter couldn't see it. Then, yesterday evening, something unexpected happened. My daughter's best friend reached out to me through social media. She asked if we could talk, saying there were things about the graduation party I needed to know. We met at a coffee shop near the college campus. She was nervous, fidgeting with her cup as she explained what she'd witnessed in the days leading up to graduation. Apparently, my ex-wife's husband had been pressuring my daughter for weeks to publicly praise him at the party. He'd told her that her mother was worried about how the divorce had affected me and that it would mean a lot to the family if she could show appreciation for how he'd stepped up as a father figure. She said my daughter had been uncomfortable with the request but felt pressured to go along with it. The specific words she'd used, about me never doing anything, had been suggested by her stepfather. He'd convinced her that emphasizing his contributions would make the family look more united and successful. According to her friend, my daughter had been having second thoughts about what she'd said since the moment the words left her mouth. She'd seen my face when she'd said it and knew immediately that she'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was too late to take it back. This information changed everything for me. It didn't excuse what my daughter had done, but it explained it. She hadn't spontaneously decided to humiliate me. She'd been manipulated into it by someone who wanted to claim credit for my 18 years of sacrifice. The friend also told me that my daughter had been afraid to call me directly because her stepfather had convinced her I was having a mental health crisis. He'd told her that any attempt to contact me would only make things worse and that the family needed to handle the situation carefully. I realized then that this had never been just about my relationship with my daughter. It was about her stepfather's need to be seen as the hero of the story, even if it meant rewriting history and destroying other relationships in the process. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. Update 3. I called my daughter this morning. After 2 weeks of silence, I finally picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the relief in her voice when she realized it was me. The conversation was awkward at first. She immediately started apologizing, saying she'd been worried sick and didn't understand what had happened to make me so angry. I let her talk for a while, listening to the confusion and hurt in her voice. Then I told her about my conversation with her friend. I explained what I'd learned about the pressure she'd been under and the specific coaching she'd received about what to say at the party. Her silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, she was crying. She admitted that she'd felt uncomfortable saying those things, but had convinced herself it was just a small lie to make her stepfather happy. She said she'd never meant to hurt me and had been hoping I wouldn't take it seriously. I told her that was exactly the problem. She'd thrown away 18 years of my love and sacrifice for something she considered a small lie. She'd been willing to publicly humiliate me to avoid an uncomfortable conversation with her stepfather. And when the consequences of her choice became clear, her first instinct had been to assume I was having a breakdown rather than considering that maybe, just maybe, I had legitimate reasons to be hurt. The conversation that followed was the most honest one we'd had in years. I told her about the bank statements and receipts I'd looked through, about the sacrifices I'd made that she'd never seen, about the countless ways I'd prioritized her needs over my own wants. I explained that the college fund represented far more than money. It represented 18 years of choosing her future over my present. She listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said she'd never thought about it that way. She said she'd always just assumed the money would be there, like it was a given rather than something I'd worked to provide. That assumption, that my contributions were a given, was exactly what I'd needed her to understand. I'd been so reliable, so consistent in my support, that she'd stopped seeing it as support at all. It had just become part of the background of her life, invisible and expected. I told her I loved her and that I wanted to repair our relationship, but that it had to be built on mutual respect rather than assumptions. I explained that I wasn't trying to punish her by taking away the college fund. I was trying to show her what my support actually looked like when it was gone. She asked if I would consider putting the money back if she could prove she understood what she'd done wrong. I told her it wasn't about proving anything to me. It was about her genuinely recognizing the value of what she'd dismissed and making sure it never happened again. By the end of the conversation, we'd agreed to start over with our relationship. Not picking up where we'd left off, but actually starting fresh with new boundaries and expectations. She would get a job to start saving for college herself, and I would match whatever she saved dollar for dollar. The original fund would stay where it was until she could demonstrate that she understood and valued the sacrifice it represented. She agreed to those terms without argument, which told me more about her state of mind than anything she'd said directly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was talking to the daughter I'd raised rather than the stranger who'd stood on those patio steps and dismissed my life. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not because the conflict was over, but because my daughter and I were finally having the relationship conversation we should have had years ago. The calls from my ex-wife and her husband have continued, but they feel different now. Less frantic, more calculating. They've clearly realized that my daughter and I are talking again, and they're trying to figure out how to spin this situation to their advantage. But I'm not worried about their spin anymore. My daughter knows the truth now, about the manipulation and the pressure and the 18 years of sacrifice that led to this moment. More importantly, she's beginning to understand the difference between being supported and being valued. The college fund is still in my account, and my daughter is starting her first shift at a local restaurant tomorrow. She calculated that if she works 30 hours a week through the summer and 20 hours a week during the school year, she can save about $15,000 toward college by next fall. With my matching contribution, that would give her $30,000 for her first year. It's not the full $47,000 that was originally available to her, but it's something she'll have earned through her own effort. And maybe that's worth more than the difference. The last message I received from my ex-wife's husband was short and bitter. He told me I'd proven what kind of man I really was, and that my daughter would never forget how I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. He was wrong about that. I didn't abandon my daughter. I taught her what my support was actually worth. And based on our conversation this morning, it's a lesson she's finally ready to learn. Tomorrow, I'm going to start putting money back into a college fund for her. Not the original amount, but something new we're building together. Something she'll understand the value of because she'll be part of creating it. And if anyone asks her at her college graduation party 4 years from now who helped make her education possible, I'm confident she'll have a different answer than the one she gave 2 weeks ago. That's not revenge, that's respect. And after 18 years of being taken for granted, I finally taught my daughter the difference. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.